Forests in Europe cover approximately 35% of the land area, and they provide timber and jobs for millions of people. But their benefits also touch our daily lives. You might enjoy a walk on your favorite forest path in the weekend, or go out to collect berries and mushrooms. But did you know they are also crucial for fighting climate change, and they are hugely important for biodiversity? How should we navigate through the forest of opportunity and demands? If you want to find out more about these questions, you are in the right place. Welcome to the first episode of the ForestChats podcast. This is a new podcast series brought to you by the ForestPaths project. My name is Verkerk and I'm Chief Scientist at the European Forest Institute and coordinator of the ForestPaths project. I am joined today by Diana Feliciano, and she is professor at Teesside University in the United Kingdom. In the project, her work relates to the topic of climate and biodiversity-smart forest management, and this will also be the topic of our chat today. Welcome, Diana. Could you still say something about yourself, who you are?
Thank you. Yes, I am, first of all, I think I am Portuguese, but I've worked in the United Kingdom for 17 years now. I've studied cross disciplines because I investigate this topic around land use and climate change and how land use can contribute to climate change mitigation, adaptation and rural development. So I felt that I should go across disciplines. So my first degree is in forestry engineering with a specialization in natural resource management. Then I decided to do a master's in economics, and then my PhD is in geography. I've worked first in Aberdeen at an institute that was called the Macaulay Land Use Research Institute, actually in the socioeconomics research group, researching all around these topics on land use. And then I worked at University of Aberdeen and at UNESCO in Paris, and more recently I've moved to Teesside University, to the International Business School, and it's relevant to have these kind of topics at the business school: sustainability, climate change, land use, because all sectors of the economy have to contribute to mitigate to climate change, including the business sector, but also the business sector is partnering because it can't mitigate all the emissions, so it has to offset somehow. So he's now looking at other ways on partnering with the land use sector to offset its own emissions. And then there's all the topic around sustainability, which is now very relevant for students as well. I'm also seconded to DEFRA, which is the UK Department for Food, for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And we are just now coming into very interesting times because we've changed government, so all the kind of plans, policies there are to be achieved, but still up to review, and I'm contributing to those reviews now as well. At ForestPaths, yes, I am leading work package 1 on the understanding what is forest management that can contribute to climate change mitigation, adaptation and biodiversity, how forest managers make their decisions, what factors influence their decisions, and how can we nudge forest managers to actually contribute to these policy targets and these twin goals or twin challenges that are climate change and biodiversity loss.
Thank you. So, because in your work you explain you focus also on climate and biodiversity smart forest management. Could you tell a little bit more what it actually is? What is climate smart and what is biodiversity smart?
Yeah, this was interesting discussion when we were writing the proposal. So this kind of concept came in a discussion when we were writing the proposal, because we are first, there's already a very well-established concept which is well known among the forest science and the social research around forestry, which is climate smart forestry, which is about management that can contribute to 3 kind of goals, which are climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, but at the forest level. So being adapted, the forest adapted to changes in climate, but that can contribute to carbon sequestration, and together with carbon sequestration, that we still producing wood especially wood, for the benefit of the owner or the manager. We thought because of the latest countries' commitments and the UN Global Biodiversity Framework, the GBS, which countries committed as well lately, and the relevance of, the relevance and the importance and the big challenge of biodiversity loss, that there was something missing there. So it was not so emphasized, this part on the biodiversity, because while you're meeting climate change mitigation and adaptation, it should be in parallel with trying to conserve and protect and create habitat for biodiversity, because we all know that, at least in Europe, is really depleted, and with these new commitment, countries are, committing themselves to restore habitat, to increase biodiversity as well. So we also like looking now at literature, what literature is saying about what we're trying to put together, which is not easy. So it's in terms of how can we decide, we're trying to find out a method of assessment that can tell us this kind of forest management approach, or this bunch of practices within this forest management approach can be considered climate and biodiversity smart. So not just climate smart forestry and just contributing to climate mitigation, adaptation and production, but also biodiversity smart. So it's just how we put this information together. So we're trying to see whether some practices can contribute positively to these three dimensions. So this is still up to discussion if it has to meet all the kind of purposes. But more definitely biodiversity is becoming really important, and actually I think more and more from what I see in terms of the policies as well, I think is more if biodiversity dimension is not met or achieved, is actually compromising calling forest management climate and biodiversity smart. I think it's going towards that way. But when we call adaptation is again about adaptation of the forest to new climate conditions. So potentially adaptation to pests and diseases, to wind throw, to kind of floods, soil erosion, something like that. Mitigation, we're mostly talking about soil carbon sequestration and storage, and above carbon sequestration and also carbon storage. The products, are you saying about wood products that also store wood for long time if they don't, depending on the lifetime of the product, but they can store carbon for a long time and even be recycled, reused, and re-enter the economy again. And when we talk about biodiversity, we're looking at what the literature is telling us about forest management impact on biodiversity, and looking at the indicators used, such as habitat, Shannon Index, or species richness. So some of the indicators are mostly used to kind of compare forest management against biodiversity.
So there's broadly 4 different components, if I understand you correctly. So you have a focus on looking at mitigation, you have a focus on looking at how forest and forest management need to be adapted to the impact of climate change, how forest and forest management could be better managed or better develop towards more and better biodiversity values of the forest, and perhaps also a little bit on the wood use, because also there's a lot of people that are relying on forest for their income and for their jobs. As these products also contain carbon, and they also avoid emissions, or can avoid emissions, if they substitute for materials made from concrete and steel and so on.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's just one thing about one conceptual discussion is where do you put the boundary of the concept itself of climate and biodiversity smart. So if you put at the forest kind of level, so it's about forest management, or if you extend it to include the supply supply chain. The other thing as well is that the wood and the demand for wood and the need for wood towards replacing other greenhouse gas intensive products will come probably from the other side, which is the consumer, that then will influence management. That still you have to look at these three dimensions again. So you can it's like, it's related, it's interconnected, so it's quite a system in a way that you can't separate both, but at the same time it's about the management where you're talking about these three dimensions that need to supply the wood for this new economy that is requesting this product.
When you have these four elements, when you think something is smart, because we talk about climate and biodiversity.
So you would have more like a it is more the supply chain is climate and biodiversity smart. No, it's like the wood. It is the production and the consumption part of forest, and we are always discussing this, whether we should take into account the production side and the emissions from the production side, and look at the production side or look at the consumption side as well, and this is important in terms of, again, leakage and importing from other countries, and all the discussion is really relevant. It's just we still are deciding a bit whether we've decided more or less, but there's still some discussions to be done there, I think.
Well, I guess it's difficult to decide when something is always smart, when you have to meet four goals at the same time. And you need to strike a balance probably between these, and then hopefully you optimize as many as possible.
So we undertook a literature review on the factors influencing forest managers across Europe, and we've noticed there's also from there already a difference in terms of the methods implemented. Sometimes people, researchers, our colleagues, they do a survey, sometimes they do interviews to assess this, sometimes they do focus groups or workshops. We've looked at what they've done, what they came up with. We've looked at coverage as well across Europe, because although we are 12 partners, is that correct? 16, okay, 16 partners. There's more than 16 countries in Europe, in the European Union, and that would find this relevant for our study. So we're not just restricting ourselves to the countries within the project, because the information will be relevant, for formulating policy at European level. We've undertook a literature review to look at what's been done in this topic, and we found one of the things that we knew already. Obviously, when we look at factors influencing forest managers, perfect information would be that you interview every forest manager that you can, but that's not feasible, not for time, not for money.
How many forest managers are? Do you know?
Even that, there is a gap. We don't know. So some countries don't really know. There's kind of estimatives of forest managers or owners. Portugal is one of these cases where there's always a magic number coming up, which is 400,000, but it's kind of expert knowledge somehow. We have forest owners associations with membership, but we can't count only them, because obviously we know that many people are not members. Anyway, if you don't, and the other thing is you don't have a cadastre in some countries as well, where you know exactly to whom those plots of forest belong and what do they do in their forests and things like that. So here we have to sample, or we have to do interviews, or we have to do workshops. And one thing that is very common as well is trying to group the forest managers or the forest the owners into types of forest managers or forest owners. And although
why you do that?
Yeah, that's exactly because we cannot interview everybody. We would not be able also to understand, to account for all the range of factors and values that are how many million people have, isn't it? So imagine time that by number of values each of us have and factors that influence us. But when we do these studies, there's always some things that are common. It's almost like when we vote, isn't it? Is people that vote more on the left, some people vote more on the right, some people vote more on the center, and there's a range of common values or common factors that make people vote or be in different groups. So this happens as well in terms of managers, and I would say in terms of other farmers as well. It's common to do farmer typologies as well, so it's another area where this is being explored a lot. It's about a range of factors that mostly likely influence, and that's the reasons or the objectives of the types of management that put different people in different groups. And usually we find 4 or 5 types of owners types or managers types in the literature. And then I can tell you that then we also, from that and analyzing the gaps, we went to do some interviews and some workshops, and in fact it somehow confirms that we always at least 4 or 5 types that we can group them, they occur, so that's interesting to see. But these types usually, we can say there's some people that are very kind of production focused, profit focused. They're looking at their forests as a way of taking some financial revenue, and usually also the trees that they manage or the forest that they manage, the ecosystem also corresponds to that type of more intensive and productive vision. So we would have 3 species that would kind of be more common to find in this economist kind of thinking or behavior. Although even then you could find variation, but that's kind of a commonality.
So you're trying to typify groups of people that are somewhat similar in their behavior or similar in their belief.
In their beliefs,
and then people are a bit more economic oriented, some are perhaps a bit more environmental or oriented. Or perhaps some people don't even do anything. They're more passive groups.
So, and then you have some characteristics that help you to kind of put them in certain groups. And as you say, you can have this very intensive or productive vision type, but you can have others that are more passive. And then again, within passive, you could almost find another typology, but obviously within passive, sometimes we mean that people that undertake minimum management or minimal decisions about the management. But this could correspond to people that actually don't live near their forests or don't even know they inherited these forests, or they got it restituted, but they never actually engaged in forest management because policy is a bit viable and they don't know whether this will last, this restitution. People emigrated from that area, so rural migration is common and leaving the plots behind or to the city. But you also have other passive that are actually, there's a decision more or less as well to not doing much. And you could also argue those are more environmentalist than types, which is another type, because I think the forest should grow by itself, should naturally regenerate the species. But even in Europe, because forest is highly managed and sometimes you do have to do something, because leave it a forest to itself, yes, it can regenerate and stuff, but if you are with that environmentalist vision, maybe you have to deal with invasive species such as acacia, or you don't want eucalyptus there, so you probably would favor more other native. So you are doing a decision there towards naturalness, or you're going back a bit to what was before, and that's almost like a decision that may put you in that group of environmental forest manager. And in the middle you have, sometimes we put everybody there that we don't know where to put it, which is the multi-objectives that that do lots of things, that they produce a bit of wood, but then also they like to go to the forest to enjoy, but they also have other species and try to do other things as well. And also we try to put sometimes municipalities or the forest owned by the state in that category because they've been more and more pushed by the society to deliver multiple ecosystem services. So more and more the kind of forests that are owned by public entities, they are kind of managing for multi-purpose rather than just with one objective in mind.
So you're saying that the forests are already managed for multiple objectives. So people, that probably means also that you have to make a decision on things that you favor, perhaps other things that you favor a little bit less. So do you think, out of the interviews you've had and out of the workshops and the survey, do you think forests are already managed as being climate and biodiversity smart?
Yeah, this is the thing about research where we have to, well, definitely. So the question is yes. How representative that is I think we've not got there yet, because when we do our stakeholder analysis, who we interview, who gets to accept our interviews, is always like, how biased is this? Sometimes it's snowball sampling. Sometimes someone tells you about someone, or you contact a forest association, a forest owners association. They give you some names that you can interview. Obviously, these people are usually the most interested people anyway, the most engaged. If they're already members of a forest association, is some kind of bias there already. So you have to try hard to cover people that maybe not so engaged. But then again, this can come from your extended network, and obviously that reflects where you are in the network as well. So you may actually cover another type, which I did cover, for example, with the contact that I have, but how representative and anecdotally there's more people like that, people that in the past parents moved from the rural areas to the city. The kids became very highly educated. They have jobs in the city, but they now inherited a piece of forest out. And you can call them, they are passive, so they're not doing much, but they're very interested as well on environment. They're very aware, they can read about things, they would look for themselves to do something about it. But there is again this interesting, what would enable them to do a bit more? And then it's where it gets interesting. So you're not doing much because it's away, but they would be willing to do something and to increase the contribution to ecosystem services, being climate change or biodiversity, if they are given a bit of support as well. And some things that when we do surveys that you can claim could be more representative, because they go to the population and they are random and they hit people randomly or forest decisions randomly, but then what they collect in terms of some of the data can be quite limited because of what you don't have time to discuss. Why did they answer that? Why did they say that statement? Why did they put 5 or 1? Of course, that's when we go to the interviews and try to understand that.
Yes, I guess it's always a trade-off with the amount of information you can collect from many people, or like the amount of information you get from one single person. You always need to make a trade-off. You cannot measure everything all the time,
of course,
from everyone.
But that's why you try to have different methods, because obviously this is very important thing, and it came out a lot. It's policy in many ways. So a factor that influences or is a barrier or is an enabler, lots of times you can classify that under policy regulations or policy. So when you have a project trying to advise policy development, obviously you can't rely on one method, and one method being maybe a survey, or one method being an interview. You have to find a range of methods, because you have to have a way of capture several things as well, and not be so limited to say, yeah, we are very representative, but no, we don't know why this happened. That's what policymakers would like, actually. It's like saying, okay, if I give them 100 euros per hectare for them to manage this way, would people uptake this grant and do it? And then you put that in the model, and the model says, oh yes, you would have 20% of forest owners that would do that. That is great. But in reality, sometimes that's what you try to get from the models, but in reality that doesn't happen in real life.
That's true, but I think models are typically also based on measurements done.
And you have to release your assumptions, and there's lots of things that are again not covered. So that's why we try to cover them with the interviews and the workshops. So we say, okay, but this may not happen because in this country this is really important. This factor is really important. We're not considering it. So, for example, so is that discussion that then you need to have about looking at the different things to see if you can actually have a better informed conclusion and advice as well for the policymakers. And I was yesterday, very interesting discussion yesterday with our colleagues that are developing this type of decision model, the crafty model, with our colleague from within the work package that is undertaking the survey. And really, really nice, really, really great work. But I remember actually a colleague, Florencia, saying, I try to model traditional knowledge, good luck, or emotional attachment to land. How do you model something like people's attachment to land that you can just see when you talk to people on the ground? You just can feel when you talk to people on the ground. You can just see how they describe their emotional attachment. You can't see these in a statement that a person ticks in a survey. And this can be really important in a place like Sicily. Sicily, no. It's not Sicily.
Sardinia.
It's Sardinia. Sorry, that's a mistake. Sardinia, we went to Sardinia. That's one of our demo cases. So this is really, it was interesting how important their attachment to the trees is. And I'm talking to a special tree as well. So this is cork oak, where it's not the tree that is harvested, it's the cork, which is a product that you could consider so biodiversity and climate friendly. But it's interesting how they describe almost that they know that tree, they know how the tree feels, they know if the tree is coping or not with the climate, and how they should proceed to the extraction of cork so it doesn't disturb the tree if they seem it's under stress, for example. You see, and what they describe as well is other people coming from the outside to do the same work and to extract. They're a bit too touchy actually, because they see, I don't want anyone else touching on my trees because they don't know how to do it. They've not been here for a long time enough to know the trees. So this is an extreme, of course, of what you could call climate, this attachment to.
But you say that basically all forests are managed according to climate and biodiversity-smart principles. But if that would be the case, why are we still investigating this? What does something need to be done to make things better?
Yeah, that's because I said yes, it is implemented, but it's the extent of it and the extent that we need.
So you see cases individually taking place, but it's not happening everywhere.
And that's why the research is really important, to tell you where it's happening and what are the contributing factors for that to happen in that place, and whether you could take some of those factors to somehow develop them in another place. You don't guarantee, obviously, but it's interesting to know what works where and why, so you could advise and see this is happening here because this of that, and then you can say to policymakers, this is a group of factors that actually make this happen. And then you can't just say, okay, this is a good recipe for doing this somewhere else. But it's then, again, when the context is really important. But this happens in this context, so we have to also find out in other places whether it could actually...
To see if the context is right.
See if the context is not too much of a bigger factor that actually in another place wouldn't work. So that you try to do it and it fails.
So what are the factors that you find that are contributing to uptake of climate and biodiversity smart practice? Or what are factors that are in any way shaping how people are taking decisions about the management of their forest?
People with this environmentalist vision or this traditional kind of vision. So traditional in a way that in these areas of cork, oak, this is an agroforestry system, which is kind of open, not so intensive, is still extensive. You have, you don't harvest the tree, you harvest the product, a non-wood product. You have a tree that is quite imposing, that is there for hundreds of years sometimes. So you maintain an ecosystem that is not just one species, it's several, from insects to birds to reptiles. Even then you have the cork that you produce that stores the carbon that you want for your economy. You have the tree, you have other woody biomass as well. You have the dead wood sometimes that contributes to biodiversity. And it's because these trees that are there for a long time, sometimes they also well adapted to climate. So they almost like the trees learn as well to adapt throughout these years, although sometimes there's a threshold. So on climate, there's a threshold, and sometimes adaptation is not possible anymore. There's pests and diseases that you know.
Yes, and of course the tree is also adapted to the current conditions and not the conditions of the future.
There's fire, increasing risk of fire, which up to a certain level, these trees could be quite resistant and adapted to an ecosystem where fire was always present, but at the intensity of fire these days may not be resistant anymore. So in fact, there is some need to maybe not to manage as before, which was maybe minimum intervention in terms of, where you had even animals in the past, more sheep or pigs roaming, and you have less now as well. You need to adapt your management to also reduce the risk of forest fire or pests and diseases, even in an ecosystem that you would think that is quite in equilibrium with nature or kind of climate and biodiversity smart. So we still have to do something. But obviously then it's some other factors that can you push you from doing that is this rural out-migration. So you don't have many people anymore in these areas to do it. So this is like a barrier for it. So people want to do it, even some of the owners are there, but you need some labor as well. Yourself, one person may not be able to do a lot. So you need some people, and people may not be there. So you have a factor in favor that the person is doing. They have that traditional knowledge, that they have something that inherited, that they are emotionally attached with, which they want to maintain, which there is rentability, profitability on the product, but at the same time there's other factors pushing you from doing that. If you have another system like eucalyptus or in Portugal, which is quite highly profitable as well. So it's in some cases people don't manage because you always, even if it burns, you don't get the paid by the wood for the pulp and paper industry, but you didn't have any cost. So in a way you have the profit. So what is even not, there's no, you see again how you frame this about management. What's the factors enabling management? That you're managing a tree without a cost, and we don't manage basically what the favor it is, what the factor is in Sardinia to manage, which is the profitability of the product, may not be enough for you to be an incentive for you to manage maybe an eucalyptus forest, because you will have a profit if it doesn't burn and you don't have any costs, and if it burns you don't get the profit but you don't have any costs. So
you mentioned now economic conditions, that are profitability from the wood or from other products that are coming out of the forest. Yeah. Also environmental conditions, you described the risk of fires, but are there any other factors? And perhaps also, are there any factors that are elsewhere in Europe?
And then you have some subsidies and grants, so that's where policy is interesting as well, whether if you put some in grants or incentives or rewards for people doing well and do according to these guidelines, so favor native species, tree species, mix biodiversity. And in fact, some of the more public entities or municipalities are claiming for this type of support to manage it towards these objectives, but also some private owners are also claiming, and what you see is that's been a greater uptake of these subsidies and grants where advisory services are most effective, or they are more engaged with this kind of advice, somehow independent advice from forest owners associations or from extension services from the country. There is...
So this is an additional one, because we talked about economic instruments, we talked about financial mechanisms, the environmental conditions, but now also you say also information is also an important factor by which you
information is really important, so that's another thing we saw actually both, I think throughout all the 4 demo cases. It's that in a way the people are getting a bit sometimes more lonely in these rural areas, and actually this is a good opportunity, even these workshops within the project, for them to meet each other and to exchange some ideas about what they are doing, what's working in theirs, giving advice to each other. So we observed this as well, of people being really engaged and exchanging number phones and experience and telling what they were doing. So this is peer-to-peer learning, seems interesting, and we've observed this more in the farmers community as well, where we say the farmers can be quite lonely as well, and when they get together it's an opportunity for them to exchange ideas and have that social contact with others. So this is also, I think, verified in the forest owners, which sometimes they are farmers as well. In another way, you can see policy sometimes could be quite strict and top-down. There's a case of more eastern countries like Romania, quite top-down policy guidelines towards what they say, well, we're doing this already, the policy is strict and is saying for us, we have to do this. So in a way, it could be also top-down policy is then important, is to verify what's the extent of implementation of the policy. So it would be interesting for further research to see, okay, we've been there, they've said policy is there, we have to do it, it's mandatory. Are you implementing these climate and biodiversity, forest management, doing this and that? Say, yeah, of course, policy tells us to do that. But we've not gone... We went to a forest that, they say, oh, that's why we say this is climate and biodiversity smart, but what's the extent? So that's another...
So perhaps some people might be critical. They say you are mainly talking to people, so you talk through surveys, through interviews, through workshops, and people tell you how they would behave, but ultimately this should also be visible somehow in the forest. So have you also looked how these behaviors change or can be seen through measurements or that we do in the forest?
So that's why, as you say, the models are probably important.
Not models directly, because they try to just explain patterns or help to understand the systems that we have, but you can also do directly measurements in the forest and see if you see particular patterns in how trees are harvested, or how forest management is done in the forest as a result of all these factors that are shaping the decisions.
In that case, yes, we see. Through the interviews we didn't ask questions. We didn't go to. In the interviews we didn't go to the forest sites. So in the interviews we talk to people, ask them what you're doing. They described some of these practices and what kind of how often they harvest, or whether they are replacing or planting more productive trees, or whether they are replacing those productive or something like eucalyptus in Portugal with or more native trees, and why, whether they are implementing natural regeneration or they planting, and you see a mix of this happening what you cannot not observe is like a trend, because actually when you do interviews or you do these workshops on the ground, you see that a mix of practices happen, and you see that more maybe in Finland. You live there, so most people may have, there's a pattern on how people manage their forests, but probably even that pattern is now changed according to our societal pressure, but also the policy goals that we now have. So there's some kind of factors that are maybe making people change their management ways. So not so much like in the past, towards plantations and harvest at the end of the rotation cycle, plant again, but maybe opening, also thinking about how do they harvest, because they were planted in highly organic soils, even peat in the past. So they have to take these considerations into account these days, which in the past they were not so important. So all these kind of new factors influencing how management is undertaking these days, but obviously is how through the observations with the national inventory, national forestry inventories, that you could observe what's happening at the kind of European level, if you have the data for the countries. And if you had even the repeated observations or what happened on the plots that are measured, you could actually find a trend. Is this happening, and where is there a pattern that we can? Unfortunately, what we see is that countries are not, and that's something that we could advise policy is reinforce that data collection on the ground is really important, and the national forest inventory, the continuity of it and invest on it is really important as well, to produce information that we need to make decisions. So it's not just about talking to people, it's about triangulating data from different sources, and the observations of what happens on the ground that can be given by the national inventory, the national forest inventories, but through remote sensing, other techniques as well, where you can see what's happening. But especially the national forest inventory should be an investment of all countries, and actually making that data somehow open for research. That would be useful at the European level for formulation of policies as well, and to see whether some of their mechanisms are working or not, or if it's going towards one direction that is not going to achieve the goals that we need to achieve.
Yeah, I think we soon need to end the discussion, but it seems, from what I understand, you have collected a wealth of information from all the different exercises or activities that have been carried out so far. So just to perhaps to summarize, if you have one sentence, what is needed to implement climate and biodiversity smart forest management in Europe? How could that be done? One sentence.
One sentence, okay. No, I think it's really important, strong independent advisory systems and promote interchange between or exchange between managers, and rewarding those that are already doing the right thing. And actually have incentives as well for those that would like to implement something like that. And there's a lot of those there's some of those that are doing already, is about rewarding them so they can show it can be done, can become champions, and others could follow. So actually you have, is like the innovation theory from Rogers. You have always the early adopters, and then at some point the other follow, but we want them to follow quickly enough. So we reach the goals that we need, because we have a short timeline to do it.
Thank you, Diana, for the interesting discussion. A big thank you also to all the listeners. It was a pleasure to welcome you to the first edition of our new podcast series, and we will have more interesting content for you in the future. You can find out more about ForestPaths on our website or through our socials, and you can find all details in our podcast description. Take care, and until next time.